Hey, it's Sarah Burke here from the Women in Media podcast. And before we get started on a new episode, could I get you to hit like, follow, subscribe, hit the bell, whichever app you do your podcast listening in. Make sure you're all set up so you know when there's a new episode and you can help spread the word. Oh, and if you're so inclined, could I ask you to leave a review if the app that you're using does that? You're the best. All right, let's get to the show. I'm Sarah Burke, the host of the Women in Media podcast. This episode welcomes the ladies behind a brand new Indigenous women-owned record label. And if you're paying attention, you know that this episode is also being released just ahead of the first National Day for Truth and Reconciliation in Canada. If that makes you nervous, if you don't know where to start on that topic, this episode is a great place. I have learned so much from these two women, and I have no doubt that you will as well. One of my favorite parts of working with Indigenous artists over at my day job is their incredible storytelling that's passed on through generations.
As Indigenous artists and as women, we just were like, things aren't perfect. Let's not replicate, the shit that's not working. And in the Seven Fire Prophecies, each fire refers to a time period in Anishinaabe history and current moments. And it said that we're in the time of the seventh fire now, which is a time of great turmoil, and that great decisions will need to be made during the seventh fire. And if we can choose to return to our teachings, return to that path of balance, return to, a greater respect for the earth and for one another, that we will be able to light the eighth and final fire, where a great nation will be formed. So Ishkōdé and Anishinaabemowin means fire, and the whole premise is really about songs for the eighth fire.
My guests today are ShoShona Kish and Amanda Rheaume, the founders of Ishkōdé Records. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Thanks for having us. It's great to see you.
Okay, so first things first, you guys definitely have known each other for quite some time, but how did you dream this up? How did this happen?
Well, we are musicians. The first time Amanda and I can target that we met was actually like sharing a stage at the Ottawa Folk Festival. So we found each other many times over the years on the touring path. And and we worked on a couple of projects together just before we started doing all of these crazy things. Amanda performed on a show that I produced with the National Arts Center called Anishinaabekwe, which was really amazing and beautiful. And I feel like that was kind of the touch point from that we started to like be more in touch with each other and chatting. And I don't know, is that your recollection, Amanda?
Yeah, definitely. It was 2003 Ottawa Folk Festival workshop stage with you and Raven. And I can't remember what time of year Anishinaabekwe was, but we definitely started working on the summit shortly after that.
So for a little context, Raven is ShoShona's partner and also the other half of Digging Roots, the band. And what about you two working on the Indigenous Music Summit together? I was lucky enough to, take one in before the pandemic. How did you get involved in working with the summit?
Well, the summit, I think it's an idea that evolved really quickly. It started for me backstage at a festival. And I was in Australia, and I was just having the most gorgeous conversation with these artists and programmers and folks from around the world. And, Indig crew find each other. Yeah. And so, there's just like, as we were talking, more and more Indig crew who happened to be at this festival in Australia gathered round, and we were just like having a very casual, really warm, and super inspiring conversation. And as I was sitting there listening to all these brilliant people, I was like, oh, I wish so-and-so was here, or I wish this other group was a part of this conversation, or I wish this amazing programmer was sitting here with us today. And I think it just in that moment, I was like, I got to organize something. I got to do a thing here. So I called my friend, who's the executive director of Folk Alliance International, and I caught him at 2 or 3 in the morning because of the time difference. And I was like, hey, Angus, you want to do a summit? And he was just like, yes, yes, I do.
You caught him at his most vulnerable time.
I don't think he had any idea what he was signing up for. And that sort of began the journey. And somewhere like mid-course in the planning of that first year, I realized that it wasn't something I could do alone. And I called Amanda like randomly out of the blue. And I kind of like the way I called Angus. I was like, hey, it wasn't 2 a.m. though.
No.
But yeah, I was like, hey, I'm working on a thing. I'm wondering if you want to help me.
And when was the moment that you two, after working together on a few different things, saw the vision of Ishkōdé Records?
Want to take that, Amanda?
Sure. Well, ShoShona had mentioned that she wanted to start a label a few times. She was sort of peppering it into all the other work that we were doing and all the other conversations we were having. And just before the pandemic, I guess late 2019, all the years are, I can't tell what year it is. But yeah, we had a more serious meeting about it, and like we're gonna do this, we're gonna start this. And very shortly after that, and very shortly actually after the Stronghold concert that we put on for Wet'suwet'en, we really started planning and putting some wheels in motion. But I would say that one of the silver linings of this whole pandemic is that, we were at home. We weren't moving around as much. It certainly expedited the launch and the kind of initial burst of flames of the record starting as a fire. So, yeah.
Okay, now we got to get into exactly that. There's fire involved in the founding story of this record label. Explain the Indigenous teaching that sort of inspired not only the label name, but your mission statement.
Yeah, I think as we were dreaming into the space for the record label and really kind of searching for, what is the foundation of what we want to do and how can we source the things that we need to chart like the proper path forward? Because I think we knew right away that we didn't want to just sort of dial in the status quo and do things that have been done before exactly as they had been done before, because as artists, and as Indigenous artists and as women, we just were like, things aren't perfect. Let's not replicate, the shit that's not working. Let's really like let our minds open to what the possibilities could be. And for me, when I'm searching for that, I always go to the teachings. And, it's such a rich place for me, the Anishinaabe teachings that I was very lucky to grow up with. And I was thinking about, at the time, the prophecies, the 7 fire prophecies were just really present in my mind. And I think I was sort of revisiting those teachings. And every time you go back to the teachings, that something new emerges. And in those prophecies and those teachings, the elders talk about the lighting of the 8th fire. And in the 7 fire prophecies, each fire refers to a time period in Anishinaabe history and current moments. And it goes back like it's really old. And it's kind of amazing because it prophesized like very accurately some pretty profound things. And it said that we're in the time of the 7th fire now, which is this, they talk about it being a time of great turmoil, a time of great power as well, where we need to like return to our teachings and return to a sense of balance in the way that we live, and that great decisions will need to be made during the 7th fire. And if we can choose to return to our teachings, return to that path of balance, return to, a greater respect for the earth and for one another and for creation, that we will be able to light the 8th and final fire. And it said that's like the fire of eternal peace, where a great nation will be formed. I think it's sort of like that coming together of many nations can happen. And, what else are we going to work towards, really? At the end of the day, it was just like, oh, well, that's kind of everything, So Ishkōdé and Anishinaabemowin means fire. And the whole premise is really about songs for the 8th fire, stories for the 8th fire, moving in that direction.
I say this a lot, like when I hear a really great song, but I just got goosebumps with you talking about like the prophecies and the forward momentum that I can tell that you guys have had, whether we're talking about the summit or the label. It's been a really exciting time to follow along on both of your journeys in music and otherwise right now. with the matriarch role in these teachings, I want to learn a little more about why you've decided to do a, female founded record label.
Well, we didn't have another option. No, true. I'm just teasing.
But that's kind of true. Like, I think that we came to some intentionality around that matriarchal energy that we ourselves are looking towards to empower the work that we do. You know, we work really closely with elders and these really powerful women who are teaching us, helping us along our path and sort of propping us up as we do this work. And also like really sourcing that sense of matriarchy in ourselves, you know, but I mean, can you guys see these?
Nice.
Oh my gosh. Let me take a screenshot. Stay right there. Hold on.
Love
so
it.
For anyone who's just listening and not watching, I'm wearing these really rad Smash the Patriarchy earrings. Because it might be a thing. But, you know, we come from matriarchal lineages, you know, and that our cultures as the Anishinaabe are led by women. I think it's a really powerful notion for us to contemplate what it means to, you know, bring and respect women's leadership in ways that have not happened in our lifetimes. And that is not to say that there aren't women rising and that leadership isn't evident, but I think all of the sort of footholds of power remain in the hands of the patriarchy. And in our culture, it's cycled through many times. We are, like, in the most traditional sense, a matriarchal society, but there have been times where the power came out of balance, became undone. And it was said that the women were too powerful, and there were transitions of power to men. And then it transitioned back to the women holding that power. And it's been something that culturally has been discussed, you know, and was part of that ultimately like balancing energy that I think our teachings like go back to centrally. So, you know, I think that there's been a really long time where it's been about the patriarchy, and now there needs to be a balancing effect, you know, and it's not like down with the man so much as, I mean, I am like that sometimes, but
it's about up with the women.
Yeah. Like there's wisdom we need there. There's power and strength that we need there.
Amanda, I know your story is a lot different than Shoshona's. You're more recently engaging with teachings, and only in the, you know, the last, like, what would you say, 5 years?
Well, I mean, yeah, I didn't grow up with teachings, and my family didn't necessarily on the daily, you know, tote the Métis flag around. My grandpa certainly did. So it's really been, you know, as I've gotten older and come into this work and my own self, you know, returning to myself through life events that I think, you know, were put on my path, and this calling really, you know, to show up and do this work. So, I've been working a little bit with actually Shoshona's mom, and in different areas over the years, returning to myself and to the teachings that I've been really fortunate to get so far.
What was one of your biggest like breakthrough moments when you first got engaged in these conversations? Anything that really stood out as like a moment of like big reflection for you? And did Shoshona have a role to play? I bet you she did, but.
Yeah, well, I don't have my traditional name. And so we engaged in speaking about that and going through. We're still in the process. You know, I'm still on that journey. And I think it's a journey that lasts maybe your whole life, but
it's ongoing. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that I'm really looking forward to that, because as I've, like I said, gotten older, I can feel this deepening within myself. And yeah, I just feel really fortunate to have these opportunities.
So now, as you're, you know, you guys have your foundation of what you want for the label. Now it's about uplifting artists. Talk to me a little bit about how, you know, the planning and the strategizing about how this label can really uplift in the community, and some of, you know, the steps along the way that have been really special.
It's all been a really wild adventure. I'll say that. Yeah. Like, and, you know, and I feel like Amanda and I have had this really wonderful alchemy of coming together and planting seeds for these little ideas that actually wanted to move much faster and become much bigger than we were prepared for. So it's just been like trying to catch up with ourselves, and everything feels like, ooh, this is super aligned. We just gotta keep up, And so I think, it's exciting because I think also through the work around the summit, it became more and more clear just where these huge gaps were. It's just like, oh wow, people are really doing this on their own, and there are so few resources, and there's so little infrastructure for Indigenous voices to amplify. So we just and that is not, I actually think it's really important not to diminish the like powerful things that actually do exist, but even like organizations like Ishkōdé or Red Music Rising, who I think of as like our brother label, like really kind of we're out here on our own in a certain sense. So it's like, how do we show up for each other in really meaningful ways? And I think the label was it was such a natural thing to do, because it was about showing up and being like, this is undeniably important to have these spaces. So and I really hope that they continue to, well, I know they will continue to, and are currently popping up everywhere. And, and at the center of that are these incredible artists whose voices need to be heard, and it's staggering. And these stories that I think we all deserve to hear, and I think about Anishinaabe, who was our first signing, and the first time that I heard him, it was just, as you were describing, Sarah, like just goosebumps and like this full being experience for me, like just this whoa. And and I had no idea. He applied to perform at the summit, and I had no idea that he was out there doing this incredible work with this like staggering, like unique voice.
Yeah.
Unlike anything I've ever heard.
There's so many wonderful artists right now too, that there's just like a lot to like sift through as well. And I'm saying this as a programmer, and you guys do an element of this in what you do. And there's so many great artists out there who, we just need more time to discover.
Oh, totally. And I'd say that even just the timing of the application for the showcase at the summit, and us being in this discussion to launch the label, and Anishinaabe's voice and songs coming across our desk, it was all just this kind of perfect timeline. And I'd say hearing him for the first time was a significant moment for me, like one of those like, oh okay. Here we go.
So what is
this is on.
Yeah.
What is this whoa moment that made you guys have to sign him? What is it, if you tried to describe?
He sent in a video, and I started it and I was watching it. I wasn't even on the jury. There's a separate jury for the summit's applications, and it started with the guitar, and then all of a sudden this voice comes out, and it's this feeling of hearing something that's old and new at the same time. And I just remember thinking, wait, who is this? How do I not know who this person is? And where did he come from? Basically. Like my heart just started beating faster, basically. And I was like, wow.
You're onto something there though, with where the modern meets almost like the historical or the classic or the, what about you, ShoShona?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I'm looking for that like visceral experience, of just like my hair is standing, feeling moved, and to me, music is like, I respect and appreciate like all sorts of technical things in music that people can do. But at the end of the day, I let it be like, completely untechnical, completely honest, and move me. And if the technical does that, then great, so I just find that art to me on whole is about that, like my heart beating faster, or something new opening up in me, like that I haven't felt before, or that I needed to feel. And so, and I experience that often with artists, like as we, discussed who our first signing would be over the course of the year, there were so many incredible artists, for us to consider. And we really, I think for our first signing, we're really married to the idea of someone completely brand new, you know, that like we wanted to let this be a journey of discovery for ourselves and for those who join us on it. I didn't know Anishinaabe was out there. So it was just like revelatory to connect with him. And he's a gorgeous person also. And, you know, that ain't nothing.
How about the process of figuring out like distribution? There are several powerful record labels, and they are run by several powerful white men. How did you guys go on that part of the journey?
Warner has a female CEO
now. Yes. Mazel tov to Kristen.
That's brand new though. Yes. I feel, you know, like we felt like doors were really open to us. Like we were like, well, we want to talk to these folks because really, if we're going to do this, we want to fling doors open and like smash glass ceilings and change the world and like challenge people to be like super brave and badass and just like throw down. And we like made a bunch of calls and everyone took our meetings with us, which was really exciting, I thought.
I feel like that doesn't always happen too. Do you think that might be because there was more of an appetite to be listening after the summer that we just had?
Well, maybe, but these conversations took place before the summer, but I think that we can all understand that there is an uprising that's been happening for a bit of time now. Also, I want to shout out the ladies of Six Shooter because they've also been super instrumental and like awesome and, you know, introducing us to a few people as well. So just navigating. Navigating. And your podcast is, you know, speaking about women in the media and in the industry and stuff. And so that, you know, they're so awesome, Shauna and Helen. And Emily. Emily, yeah. And I agree though that, you know, they did want to talk to us, these folks. It wasn't a hard sell to get a meeting. And we had meetings with all of them.
Now, what were some of the perhaps eye-opening parts of the discussion? Something that you maybe noticed was eye-opening for one of the people you were meeting with that they had maybe never considered, that you were almost helping to inform a little bit about how record labels should be thinking.
Right. I know the first thing that comes to mind is right around the same time we were doing these meetings, we were also working on a response to the CRTC review about, you know, all the quotas and the broadcasting and all that stuff. And I remember telling them, we spoke about two things. One, that there was no Indigenous artists in the charts, on the top charts. And we would ask all of them if they had any Indigenous people working in their labels, at their labels. And I think that was a moment where I saw some folks go like, oh, wait a second, I don't have anybody that's Indigenous working here. That's something I remember.
Yeah, I will say we went in kind of guns a-blazing with some like big questions. And I felt like a real sense of responsiveness and curiosity. At worst, there was just like a and at best, like a, oh, yes, this is important. And we need to be in these conversations. And that was really refreshing because, you know, I've been working in the music industry for a long time now. I feel like it's, 15 years or something of like professional, no other gig kind of thing for me. And it's been a lot of no. And a lot of closed doors, a lot of really zero access or limited access, a lot of fighting just to have a seat at the table in a small regard. And I think we've seen a lot of changes, you know, starting to take place, but I still think we're waiting for that like seismic shift to happen where we're on a different path altogether. And I'm hoping that maybe what we're seeing right now is an evidence of that, because I think human beings at the end of the day, really, you know, we all want to show up in a way that's meaningful, like to our own lives and to like how we are with each other. And it's interesting to watch, you know, sort of the pendulum swing on these things. You know?
I can really feel it happening right now too.
Well, I really agree that humans are looking to make meaning for themselves. And I really believe that we do all, whether we're aware of it or not, want to be a part of something that matters, you know, and have our human life matter in a way, you know. And I feel the shift as well, for sure. I think that it's always going to be about wanting and needing to do more, you know, as we sit here and there's been an election and all that stuff, right?
As you were going through these meetings and, you know, planning your launch, what were the things that you guys decided were non-negotiables for Ishkōdé Records?
Ultimately, we decided to partner with Universal Music, and that is not to say that the other, you know, conversations weren't 100% beautiful, healthy conversations, but, you know, you just have a feeling once in a while that this is the right fit for you at that time. You know, that alchemy of things is what it is. And I think that what I loved about our conversations and our continuing conversation is just this like willingness to meet us on a level playing field and to consistently ask themselves, how can we show up to this in a meaningful way, and not just sort of passing that to us. You know, a big part of our conversations from our side anyways were about courage. Like, if we really want to change things, if we believe that change is important, then courage is, you know, at the center of that. And it means doing things that don't always feel comfortable. Like, we have to be willing to be uncomfortable together sometimes. And, you know, and I think that we talked about, like, what does it mean for Indigenous people to curate our own stories? Because up until now, our stories have been curated by, you know, mainstream, non-Indigenous folks from a lens of that culturally, which sort of goes from everything to like the aesthetic of what sounds good. Because what sounds good is very much rooted in culture. It's not this like singular ubiquitous thing that you can find anywhere. And you know, like tonalities even, or I don't know. And like the foundational things of what, you know, makes a story important and compelling and makes a sound, you know, move you in a particular way. I just think when Indigenous people are curating those things for ourselves, we'll hear very different things. We'll hear different sounds. We'll hear different stories, and our ears and our hearts will open up in new ways we didn't even know were possible. And, you know, when I was talking to Universal about that stuff, they were like 100% in, you know, and that means like hustling radio, you know, it's hustling, like, you know, what people end up having access to. It's hustling the people who are curating playlists. It's hustling like every aspect of the industry to perhaps take a second listen instead of saying, no, this isn't what we do, or this isn't who we are, or this isn't what sounds right for us. And say, maybe what sounds right for us is a little broader, because we all know that people have to have the opportunity to hear things many times, especially if it's new. So yeah, I thought that was like one of these non-negotiable things for me that, you know, Universal was like wholeheartedly like, yep, we're into that. You know, this is how movements start. And we get it, you know.
Amanda, maybe this goes back to what you were saying about the CRTC, but, you know, another conversation that we've definitely had off of Zoom before was about the JUNO categories. And I think ShoShona just touched on exactly that, how we have to have our ears open in a different way for that. So maybe you can speak about some of the work that you did. I know ShoShona was a sound ear in all of that, but with, you know, what you were talking to Karis about.
Yeah, so I'm the co-chair for the screening committee for the Indigenous category at the JUNOs. So for folks that don't know, every single category at the JUNOs has its own screening committee, which is the step before the jury. And that committee essentially listens to all the submissions to ensure that they're eligible in that particular category. And you can recommend, oh, this isn't really a fit, maybe it should go to this category, all that stuff. And so I've been on the committee for a while and have been the co-chair maybe 2 years or something like that. I think this is my last year, I think. But ever since I joined the committee, I've heard the other chairs say, you know, we really want to have an extra category added, a traditional category, because, and if you keep an eye on the Indigenous category at all, you'll notice that there's not really any nominated groups or artists that are making traditional music, you know, whether it be traditional throat singing or powwow or drum music, or, you know, there's the list is long of traditional music styles. But so I worked with the committee this year and another working group to essentially lobby CARIS to add a second category to ensure that, Indigenous groups and artists that are doing traditional music, that are basically keeping this form of music alive, get recognized, and that they don't just fall off the nomination list because everyone's more used to hearing contemporary music, or that's what's celebrated right now. So I feel so excited. This is the first year that it's going to happen, and the submissions are going to be announced soon. And so to me, this feels really important. And I know when Buffy created the category, I think it was in 94 or something like that. It was a dream for her as well, and for Shingoose and for Elaine Bomberry to have this second category added. So our group is really, really stoked that this is taking place finally.
Yeah, and it's not to take away. That's the whole point. Like, it shouldn't be one or the other. There should be room for all of it. There's a lot of parallels in what I do here too, in the way that we want a playlist to sound, or, music rotation. You can't just ignore the fundamental traditional side of things because there are exciting modern sounds. We have to find a way to have both on a channel that caters to this type of music and creators.
Well, and honor where it comes from, like this is the original music of the original peoples of the land that we all get to live on now. So it's so important.
Ishkōdé Records, and the near future. What's something that you guys would really like to tackle that you don't think has enough light right now? There's lots of that. I know there's a big list. That's the creation, but near future, what's like your priorities look like?
I'm thinking right now very much about commercial radio spaces and hearing Indigenous voices in those spaces. So, it's like, that's a big thing to tackle, but we're up for it.
And you know how there's like a, 35% Canadian content rule. Do you see it coming through with something like that? Or what's the way? It's a big question.
Yeah. I mean, it's like by any means necessary. Certainly those quotas, and one of the things we talked about in the radio review submission that we made was about, addressing inequity by ensuring that there were quotas for equity seeking and sovereignty affirming groups. I know what the arguments around quotas are, and I understand those. That sort of like merit-based, everything is sort of, capitalism is on this merit-based thing, but it's kind of bullshit. It's like, who has the most resources to go about doing the business of getting their music heard, or their art heard, or their political platform heard, and I think we only hear from the politicians and leaders that have enough money behind them that we get to hear anything that they have to say. And the more money people have behind them, the more we hear them. And so I think, capitalism sort of reduces this like merit system down to dollars and cents for us. And I think we have to reclaim that space. I don't think that's something we want to carry forward, particularly in the art space and in the leadership space. Like, we need strong voices. We need beautiful stories. We need, powerful leaders, and not just power in the sense of like a big bank account. We need people with integrity and like fierce intellect to help us tackle the things that are coming up against us now.
Yeah. And even in a music sense, I think music listeners, let alone the people that create the music listeners need the opportunity to hear new things as well. Because the way I see things have gone for such a long time is, if your music sounds just a little bit too different, it doesn't fit into this, column that we're trying to, shove everybody in on to radio specifically. I feel this way about, obviously, satellite and playlisting is way different. But, we're training music listeners to not know how to listen to new music that they've never heard. And so I feel really excited about just sort of pushing the needle even just a little bit on what humans are able to even have access to and hear.
Yeah. And I think about like spaces like Sarah, about like what we hear when we go to the grocery store, what we hear when we, go to the many places in the day that give us music. I'm very aware that I'm not hearing Indigenous voices in any of the spaces. So I go out in the world, and all of the voices and all the stories that I hear come from other places than my community. And it's like, there's lots of room there.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I love walking into a place and hearing Adele for the billionth time at like, sort of, you know what I mean? Like, I actually really loved Adele until I was force fed that music for a bazillion years, to the point where it's just like, please. But some of those high rotation spots that are reserved for, you know, that sort of ruin music for us could maybe be spread out a little bit to music that we really didn't even know we want to hear. And I'm excited about that. You know, I actually think that that's an easy fix in application if people just say, yeah, we agree.
So I think, you know, we've touched on politics here, and we cannot ignore that September has been a lot about the Canadian election, you know, with the platforms that we just saw all these candidates campaigning on. Did you think there was adequate representation of Indigenous issues and platforms catered to those problems? Or did you not feel as though you found something that felt like it was catered to what you guys want?
Door number 2.
Okay.
Not adequate.
Not adequate.
No, it never is.
I put this next to my desk on purpose. I mean, this is just a flyer I got in the mail, okay? But I found it really interesting that there was a checklist, and it's obviously putting two parties against each other, okay? Liberal and conservative. And you look at this list of things that they're saying, like, we want to take a strong stance on, and here's to show the difference between these two political parties. And my first question is, why is there nothing on this list that caters to a pretty big problem?
Yeah. I mean,
you know,
it's case in point, really.
Like, you would think that it would be the same level of priority as sick leave for workers or childcare. Like this.
I'm really curious about how we sort of change the way these wheels turn, because somebody made that list, presuming that they were listing what was most important to Canadians.
This is what I'm saying. Yes.
And I think that presumption is wrong. I think the absence of, you know, a meaningful platform and dialogue around Indigenous issues is something that Canadians care deeply about. And, you know, and I think it's been really troubling over the course of, you know, the last 6 weeks or so, to see sort of this media blackout on these thousands and thousands of graves or unmarked graves, and, you know, children that have been found, like, you know, it exploded into the media, and then it was just like, shut that down, you know, and take it out of the public discourse. And, you know, it's pretty interesting to see it happen so thoroughly. It's just like, they just like scrub it down and you can't find a story anywhere. And I think, you know, my community and Indigenous communities across the country have been really upset about that. I see it in my social media feeds every day. It's like, this is happening in real time in our communities, and we don't see ourselves reflected in these spaces at all. And I think that meaningful change, meaningful platforms upon which change can happen is something that is so dicey for politicians that they don't have the courage to stand up and actually say, these are the things that are most important to us as in our values as Canadians. Even now, you know, even as we're here talking about how we think maybe real change is starting to happen, it's, you know, people are too afraid of falling on the wrong side of the debate in some popularity contest, and not afraid enough of the consequences of doing the wrong things, like just being on the wrong side of history.
For it not to be front and center here, but for it to still come up when a leader is asked something in a debate, or where there's a special on the candidates, it's like, how come it doesn't come up here? And how come it's only when someone asks that you'll talk about it? That's my biggest question as a white person, because I feel like, you know, with the help of people like you two, my ears have opened to things that I never considered over the last few years. And I appreciate what I've learned from the two of you so much, but like, it's not enough to just answer a question on national TV.
Well, yeah. We're all subject to colonialism. Like even white people, you know, not getting all the facts, like, not to say I so strongly believe in do your own research, but since we're born, like we're not actually told the truth. Any of us, no one has escaped from this. So, that's why it's not on that flyer.
And there's a societal digestion part of this too. Knowing how people don't like spend enough time doing their own research, and that piece is limited. That's why there has to be pieces like this for people to digest that are like, that makes me want to learn a little more on my own if I look this up, right? So,
well, yeah, and I really agree, because the algorithms that feed us news are so strong that we need something that sort of, rises above, out of all of that stuff, and gives us the opportunity to get outside of our own little bubbles a little bit, because if you, like, I occasionally purposefully go down the rabbit hole on Twitter feeds or whatever, and I try and tell my Google to give me different things in my algorithm so I could just see a little more balanced thing of what people are talking about out there. And it's actually really hard to do.
mm-hmm.
And when you get there, you find that there are literally millions of people who are saying things and caring about things that you have no idea what they're talking about if you just live in your own little bubble.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And
how easily it is to be passed on to others, whether there's fact behind it or not, right? That's what we've seen, especially over the last 2 years, just in general. I did have another follow-up question too here with the calls to action in the report. There was very little mentioned about the arts in the calls to action. So this is where, I know the work that you're doing at Ishkōdé. If you had to make a call to action for the arts to add to that report, what would it look like?
I think one of the things that I care about the most is to respect Indigenous leadership in, curating the work that gets heard, making the work that gets seen and heard, and really challenge yourselves to see where Indigenous people are consistently missing from the narrative and from the conversation. It's like, I think that we have enough access to information and relationships and connections with one another now that this is something we can meaningfully address.
It's non-negotiable at this point. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And it means sharing power. And I know that's terrifying for all of us and any of us, but the thing is that it's not a loss of power. It's an expansion of power. And, and I think that
sharing of power.
Yeah. And the thing is that, we don't relinquish our power by bringing someone else in the circle. It seems like that, but it's not actually true, and any of us trying to do things with small circles and very little support know that the more people at the table, the stronger things become. And so, I think that while it seems like that's something that maybe we would do on behalf of the Indigenous community, it's actually something we need to do on behalf of the larger community. That's where the strength is, It's like, don't do us any favors. Let's do something great together, and let's make that the goal.
Notice when there isn't an Indigenous voice at the table, on your stage, on your program, in your office, at the party you're at. Like, just that's the first step, taking stock of those things. And then I would say, this isn't maybe a call to action, but just be brave, take chances on Indigenous leadership, but also Indigenous artists, Indigenous people in general, in whatever facet you're working in or moving in.
With the first National Day for Truth and Reconciliation being days away when this podcast is released, I can't help but think about how I didn't quite understand just a short time ago how the work that needs to be done starts with settlers, with white people. Amanda, I loved what you said earlier to me, how you believe that you are the truth part of truth and reconciliation.
Well, truth has to come first. Can't have the reconciliation part without the truth part. And I think that people making time, opening up space, opening their hearts, and their ears to listen and really embody the truth that's a big part of the work, and it's a big part of the job. That can be in small ways and big ways. And I think that we're here for the truth part, ultimately.
Mm-hmm.
What do you say to an average Canadian not paying attention?
These are great questions.
Yeah. What do I say? I mean, I often feel like I'm having those conversations. And I think that ultimately what I want to say to Canadians, whether they're in these conversations or not. I mean, I guess it's more of like a question. It's like, who do you want to be? And what stories do you want to tell about who we are right now? And what stories do you want to be told about? You know, like what do you want your legacy to be? Because I actually think that we right now can choose to be beautiful together and leave this world better than we found it, and treat each other better than those that came before, you know, and we can define what comes next. You know, this is our time. We get to do this, and we're going to do it one way or the other, passively or assertively, thoughtfully or ignorantly. I think it's really exciting to know that we get to choose. I choose in the best ways that I know how every day, and I probably fuck it up all the time, but I really genuinely choose to consciously leave this place better than I found it.
I'll just follow up with this. So how are you, to those listening, thinking about this? You know, how in your day, in your life, will you leave this place better than you found it? That's what I would just encourage people to really think about.
I'm lucky that I have, like, you know, working in the arts, right? And in the industry that we're so lucky to be a part of, there are lots of people that are interested and engaged in the conversation, but I can see, you know, in my personal life sometimes where people aren't as engaged. And that's where even asking questions and having discussions with others can just open their eyes to, and open their ears to thinking about things in a different way.
And it takes, you know, we're having this beautiful conversation and several others before this. And, you know, and then we each go about our days and go into our life and see the friends that we have and our families and everything. And I feel it's our responsibility to talk about these, you know, things in the other spaces, you know, so you go out for drinks with your people that maybe have never listened to an Indigenous artist ever in their life, you know, and teach people about this and talk about things, and not even necessarily just music related, you know?
Yeah. And to have one other person discover just a different perspective, that's part of the work.
Well, and it's part of what makes life great. You know, my favorite thing in the world is to hear something that just like lights my brain up or my heart up in a new way. That's the best, you know? And so I think that there's just a lot of really genuinely life altering potential in front of us. And I think we should just be brave and go for it.
I feel like it wouldn't be appropriate to not ask you both what you're working on musically, since, you know, we should very quickly cover that too. What's going on with Digging Roots? What's going on with Amanda Rheaume? What's coming up?
Right. Our music projects. Because we actually are musicians. I'm stoked because we're in like a new cycle, and we've got a new record, and we put out a new single in late summer, and there is a new single coming, I think, between when we're taping this and when it will actually air, called Cut My Hair, and a new music video on the 30th, and then like just a cycle of new things. I'm really excited.
And for anyone listening who would like to learn a little more about Digging Roots, you know, there's an interview posted on my socials from, you know, the SiriusXM world, if you would like to learn a little more about that. But check out The Healer and the new chapter for Digging Roots as well. And then Amanda.
Yeah, I'm just about to start a brand new record cycle. So the first single for my new record's going to come out in November, which will sort of start that thing that we're calling a waterfall of singles coming out, or something like that. And then my new album will come out fully like late spring. And so I'm so excited. Yeah.
I'm going to use a little bit of flame imagery here to work with Ishkōdé, but passing the flame on to some other women that you would love to hear more about their stories, their journeys in media, and to nominate them to come on this podcast.
Well, gosh, the long list or the short list? So many amazing women out there doing gorgeous work. You know, I think about my sister, Leela Gilday, and just all of the beautiful work she does on the stage and behind the stage. And just, I definitely would, if she's even available.
Home for her is it Yellowknife? Yeah. So she's a fabulous singer-songwriter that I have had the pleasure of, you know, doing a little bit of work with.
She's just a matriarch. You know, she's a really a stunning artist. I think, really uniquely stunning artist, doing really important work. She's also doing a lot of community-based work and amplifying other voices in her community, and just, day-to-day world-changing kind of stuff. So I just love her and respect her. I think she's amazing, and she has so much to share.
Amanda, your turn. Give us one.
Okay, I have two.
That's
I'm
okay. Go ahead.
Elaine Bomberry. And number two, I'm going to say Denise Bolduc. I think that these are folks that have been working very, very, very hard on so many different things over time. And they're, not that they're unsung heroes, if you will, or heroines, or however you want to say that, but they, they've just worked so hard for such a long time in the arts. And because they're not necessarily artists or on stages all the time, I think they both deserve. Yeah, I just want to shout them out. I love them both very much.
And all the work that we do really rests upon their shoulders, and the work that they've done to, sort of open the door for us to do what we're doing now. So I think that's really important. I also really want to throw the 6-shooter ladies into this space, Shauna DeCartier and Helen Britton, and Emily Smart. I think they're brilliant, and they've been so generous and so supportive in the work that we're doing. I actually can't imagine navigating this journey without them as friends and mentors. And, they're just generally badass for all the reasons I think maybe everyone knows. But
and another example of a female founded record label. We love that.
Yes. Yeah, 100%. I would definitely be listening to that podcast.
Amanda, okay. I know you had one more too.
We're just going to keep going. Phelan Johnson, Rosanna Deerchild, they'd be great as well.
Well, thank you ladies so much for coming on this podcast. And like I said, helping me open my eyes and my ears to a lot of stuff over the last few years. You both have played a big role in a lot of the work that I'm trying to bring to my other circles. So thank you so much.
Chimigwech. And I think also like a shout out to SiriusXM, who is like actually making an impact in the lives of Indigenous artists and, all artists. It's really important to us the work that you guys are doing. I really appreciate you.
Well, thank you.
Miigwech.
Miigwech. Thanks, Sarah.
If I may leave you with a few thoughts to end this episode of the Women in Media podcast. These conversations can be uncomfortable. Please know that Amanda and ShoShona have corrected me in the past and educated me on so many things in a loving and supportive way, where I know in my heart that they want to work with me to find a better future for Indigenous musicians. Now, how can we take all of that and apply it to the rest of what has been going on in Canada? It all begins with a willingness to open your eyes and your heart to listen, and then action in the way that makes the most sense to you. It can be something like supporting an Indigenous business. It can be bringing the name of an Indigenous colleague forward. It can be as simple as asking, why not? And as complicated as asking, how can we do a better job here? You can find out more about ShoShona and Amanda and Ishkōdé Records in the episode notes. And I highly recommend you have a listen to the new Digging Roots song that just dropped called Cut My Hair, out now on Ishkōdé Records. Here's to finding courage and being brave together. Thanks for listening.
I'm Donna Merrill, and I want to welcome you to Through the Fire, a podcast about overcoming adversity, reframing misfortune, and celebrating courage. You'll likely know me best as a musician. Maybe you've heard my music or seen me perform live before. And at the heart of what I do is storytelling. How we come out of the fire may be the most interesting part of our stories. So I invite you to join us for some incredible conversations. Through the Fire is available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or at donamero.ca.
Another Sound Off Media Company podcast.